Texas took him behind the shed and just absolutely whooped up on Pittsburgh.
Whooped them. Total and complete defensive domination. And I feel like the Texans were dominating the Steelers in pretty much every single statistical category except the score until the fourth quarter. I mean, you look at the differences in this game. When CJ Stroud coughed up 3 turnovers, the Steelers turned that into 3 points. On the other hand, the Texans were able to turn 2 Steelers turnovers into 14 points. When the Texans were able to convert 10 of 15 third downs, the Steelers 2 of 14. Talk about lockdown third down defense. When the Texans put up over 400 yards, the Steelers couldn't even muster up 200. The Steelers just totally looked befuddled. Everything that they wanted to do offensively, they looked totally and completely befuddled. The Texans defense, as we've talked about for so long, as we've known how just locked down they can be, the Texans defense last night was absolutely feasting. And I stepped away from that game really for the first time considering if the Texans are true Super Bowl contenders. Because we've seen several defensive minded teams win Super Bowls defensively. We've seen it with the Broncos with Peyton Manning, even though that was kind of a shell of Peyton Manning, they won that Super Bowl defensively. I don't trust this Texans offense. Obviously, no Nico Collins. Wish him the best. He was carted off the field last night with an injury. Like I said, CJ Stroud was just reckless with the football. 2 fumbles, 1 pick last night. I don't trust this Texans offense, but is the Texans defense good enough to carry them to a Super Bowl after what they did to the Steelers last night? That's the first time I'm legitimately thinking to myself, yes, they can be.
Look, I don't trust any team that can't play complementary football, and I'm not sure that the Texans can play complementary football because their offense is broken. And this is so much of what we've talked about from day one with CJ Stroud, who had one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen. And since then, we've known that the ability is there. But last night, it's all about that unit. You're 1,000% right. This Texans defense, which is, I think, the best single unit left in the entire playoffs, is capable of carrying Houston, I should say, all the way to the Super Bowl. Yes. But at some point, they're going to have to get more from their quarterback. I get it that, this is a weird year in the playoffs, and maybe one unit can dominate their way all the way to hoisting the Lombardi. But, man, your quarterback's got to be better than 3 turnovers in this game, especially because, look, I think the Steelers were outmatched. That's why I thought it was going to be a bad game to begin with. The Steelers were outmatched. So this is by far the least worthy opponent that the Texans are going to see throughout the course of this entire playoff run. And that's the offense they gave us. Don't let it fool you. 30 points did not all come from the offense. And again, the back was really broken on a defensive touchdown that put this thing out of reach. So while we'll all look at the Baltimore Ravens back in the day as a team that, man, it didn't matter if Dilfer was their quarterback, they could win because their defense was so good. That's such the exception, not the rule. I love this Texans defense. I think, again, it's the best single unit left by any team in the playoffs. It is so swarming and fun to watch. I just don't trust their offense. Caroline, let's get to the other side of this coin, though, because what we saw last night was absolutely a shellacking of the Steelers, and now we got to figure out what the hell's next. And look, let's start with Aaron Rodgers in this because Mike Tomlin's also a deep conversation. I will go to our buddy Nate Tice, our teammate at Yahoo Sports, Nate Tice, who tweeted this out. There have been 283 instances where an NFL quarterback had 20 or more pass attempts in a playoff game since 2013. Aaron Rodgers' game tonight against the Texans ranked 283rd in dropback success rate and EPA per dropback. Like, Aaron Rodgers looked overwhelmed throughout the course of this entire game because the Steelers were outmatched by a much better defense.
Yeah, and there were a few throws that would have been pop off the page kind of throws. Like look at that DK Metcalf target early in that game in the first half. It hit him right in the hands and he just drops it. So there were opportunities to be had that aren't on Aaron Rodgers, but it is kind of sad to me, Fitz, making the assumption that Aaron Rodgers is going to decide to hang it up after this season. He's kind of been alluding to that for a while. We'll see what happens with Aaron Rodgers' future. I will be kind of sad, though, if the final lasting impression that we have of Aaron Rodgers is the pick six that we saw last night. That was just kind of the perfect encapsulation or perfect cherry on top of what that game truly was. And that was the Texans defense doing whatever they wanted to that Steelers offense, and the Steelers offense kind of stepping back back and looking like, I don't even know how that just happened, but it did. But it does feel like this is the end of Aaron Rodgers, doesn't it?
It does. And then we start to wonder how we'll remember Aaron Rodgers. And the funny thing is that in a lot of ways, Aaron Rodgers spent his entire career being compared to Brett Favre, obviously. To me, the way this is all ending is going to be reminiscent as well, in the sense that when we think about Brett Favre now, we rarely talk about Brett Favre with the Jets or Brett Favre with the Vikings. We talk about Brett Favre and what he did with the Packers. And when we watch the highlights of Brett Favre, we look at some of those great moments. Almost all of those, it feels like, are in the Packers jerseys. It's in the Packers in our minds. Like, that's how we've now remembered Brett Favre. I think that's where we'll get to Aaron Rodgers. It doesn't really matter what happened for the Jets or the Steelers. The bulk of his career was spent doing things that no other quarterback could do, being one of the best in the game, being one of the best of all time. And as much as there are other conversations now that happen around Aaron Rodgers all the time, we have to remember that when we talk about Hall of Fame candidacy and when we talk about who players are and what their legacy is, so much of that is just what did they do on the field. And as we get farther removed from his time in Green Bay, I look forward more and more to the opportunity to just sit back and remember Aaron Rodgers at Green Bay, because that's where he was at his best.
Whenever I look back on the career of Aaron Rodgers, I'm not going to think about the true and utter train wreck that was the New York Jets, mostly because I don't think that's Aaron Rodgers' fault. We have a long history of train wrecks in the New York Jets, so I blame the Jets organization for that. Aaron Rodgers had some really high highs this season. There are moments during the season with the Steelers where Aaron Rodgers did look like his former Green Bay self, and that was so fun to watch, to be able to truly enjoy some of the final moments of, as you said it, one of the greatest players to ever play the position. But I will remember his time in Green Bay. I'll remember his time and how fun it was in Green Bay. The back-to-back MVPs in Green Bay. The Super Bowl in Green Bay. I'll think about how fun that team was to watch because Aaron Rodgers was quarterbacking it. I don't think it's fair to what he's done and what he's accomplished to linger on or to harp on the lows that have been the last 3 years of his career. But I think he will be and should be and is remembered as one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the position. Or are we going to remember the quirkiness of Aaron Rodgers and the ayahuasca of it all and the darkness retreats of it all and him putting his foot up on the table at a post-game press conference of it all? Sure, we will. The enigma of Aaron Rodgers, because I think that's just kind of what makes him, the mystery man that he is off of the field. But I think he deserves to be remembered as the MVP he was in Green Bay.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, this is always weird because right now, when we look at the body of work of Aaron Rodgers, it's hard to remember how dominant the early stuff from Aaron Rodgers were. That's just how we are as a society. He's not even that old. I know he's old for an NFL quarterback, but it is funny that we have to sometimes step back and sort of remind ourselves of how impossible it was to stop the best of Aaron Rodgers. The best of Aaron Rodgers early in his career could make throws that nobody else could make. And the best of Aaron Rodgers could run around in a way nobody else in the league could run around at the time. So that I look forward to getting back to that portion of Aaron Rodgers. Now, that's the easier conversation to have of what's next for the Steelers, because as we sit and try and figure it out now, the question is what's going to happen with Mike Tomlin. We've spent weeks, maybe months, maybe years at this point, Caroline, speculating about the future of Mike Tomlin. Certainly, if you are in the camp that Tomlin has to go, last night didn't put any of those fires out. When you lose 30-6 in the first round of the playoffs, continuing your now playoff losing streak to whatever 3,000 days or whatever it is. Now all of a sudden, Mike Tomlin, the first Steelers head coach to have a 9-year stretch with no playoff wins. Certainly the way it went down last night will reignite those fires even hotter for some people.
Yeah, I think it's fair to question not just did we see the last of Aaron Rodgers in his career, but did we see the last of Mike Tomlin on the Steelers sideline? I don't think the Steelers would fire Mike Tomlin, not after everything that he's done for that organization. I do think how Pittsburgh would move forward, it should move forward, is an amicable parting of ways. That, hey, Pittsburgh is ready to go in a different direction, and maybe Mike Tomlin is as well. And it feels like a very natural breaking off point. If Aaron Rodgers does decide to hang it up, and I know I heard Aaron Rodgers and what he said in that post game last night, and if Aaron Rodgers does decide to come back, I just called him an enigma. It wouldn't surprise me. Aaron Rodgers does what we least expect him to do. But let's just live under the impression that Aaron Rodgers is done. Well, the Steelers are going to need a new quarterback next year. They've been on the quarterback carousel seemingly every year since Big Ben retired. They don't really have very many players, and a big portion of their roster is old and toward the end of their career. But also, the Steelers have 5 top 100 picks, including one of the picks that they got back in return from the Cowboys for the George Pickens trade. So it feels like the Steelers are in such a transitional period at the quarterback position, really the entirety of the roster. They're now in a time where the Steelers can rebuild. Feels like the first time in a very long time the Steelers are in a position to rebuild. And the R word is a scary one. Rebuilding, if you are a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, probably sounds very scary. Does that sound scary to Mike Tomlin? Because maybe Mike Tomlin doesn't want to go through a Steelers rebuild. Maybe the Steelers say, hey, Mike Tomlin's the perfect guy to get us through a rebuild because he's been the face of consistency for so long. But I think at this point, it's time. It's time to get off the quarterback carousel. It's time to find a more permanent or at least a longer lasting solution at that position. Maybe it's time in Pittsburgh to just take a couple of steps back in order to take leaps and bounds forward. Let's get off of this carousel of going 9-8 and getting bounced in the first round of the playoffs. We've been doing that for the last decade. I think at some point that just gets tiring. At some point that gets stale. Right now, where the Steelers are right now as an organization and where their roster is constructed, it feels like the perfect point to just breathe and just release everything that's been the Pittsburgh Steelers over the last 10 years. Start fresh, start anew, and it starts at the head coaching position.
Everything you just said, I agree with, and I understand. I just think that we need to recouch the conversation around some of the failure we've seen over the last couple of years because the Steelers just haven't had a quarterback ever since Ben retired. And the funny thing is, I looked it up because it feels like Ben retired a decade ago. Ben retired in 2022. All right, so what's happened since then at the quarterback position? Well, in that 2022 draft, just months after he retired, they drafted Kenny Pickett, the first quarterback taken, I should say, that year in that year's draft. It was a bad year to draft quarterback. There weren't many available. They took Kenny Pickett. That turned out not to work. Every other year since then, they haven't picked anywhere near proximity of a quarterback. Now, you could argue last year maybe they should have gotten in the Jackson Dart sweepstakes. Maybe that would have been the great answer for them. I don't know. But certainly they brought in Aaron Rodgers because they thought that would help. None of that changes the fact that as of right now, the way the draft is working out this year, another year where there's no depth at quarterback, frankly, in the NFL draft expected, the Steelers are going to have the 21st pick. You're not getting a quarterback at the 21st pick in this year's draft. So be careful what you wish for, Steelers fans, because you're not really just wishing for a new coach. Whenever you get a new coach, you're going to need a new quarterback. This isn't the year to do that unless you think Malik Willis is a franchise savior, and I don't. But if you think Malik Willis is the franchise savior and you want to get into a bidding war, there will be one for him. All of a sudden, maybe you think that's the answer. I don't. So now I'm looking at you Steelers fans and I'm saying, fine, you want a new coach. Great. Understand that you got a lot of salaries you're going to have to dump, and you don't have a solution at the quarterback position at all. And you don't have an answer to proximity to a quarterback. So if your answer is we're just going to draft a quarterback, when? And if your answer is, well, we'll suck next year and then we'll get a quarterback, okay. I will remind everybody the thing I constantly say about the plan to tank. You cannot guarantee that you will outsuck the rest of the NFL to get that quarterback. Reminder that there were 4 teams this year, 4 that won 3 games. So no matter how hard you try to suck, you can't guarantee that you'll suck bad enough to get 3 wins, but not suck enough to actually get a top 2 or 3 pick, which you might need depending on how many quarterbacks come out. Steelers fans just keep yelling about the result, and they keep yelling about the quarterback, and they keep yelling about the fact that they haven't been competitive enough over the last few years. But nobody's actually sat down and looked at the map to how they got here and told me what Tomlin should have done that would have suddenly answered the quarterback position when they weren't in proximity to get it answered anyway. So I hear you if you want to get rid of Tomlin. I'm just saying, be careful what you wish for, because right now, you could argue, I will argue right now today, the Steelers have a tougher path to figuring out a quarterback than the Browns do. That's how bad it is right now trying to figure out what stability looks like at that position for the next 3 years.
Sam Darnold was on the street for anyone to sign. Daniel Jones was on the street for anyone to sign. Baker
Fair.
Mayfield was on the street for anyone to sign. If the Steelers wanted to pick up one of those quarterbacks in free agency, they could have, but they didn't. So it's not fair to say they didn't have a path. Drafting a quarterback, I will agree with you on that. And the best shot that they had at drafting their future quarterback was Kenny Pickett. And obviously, we know how that turned out. So I hear you on there hasn't been a clear path to a quarterback, but isn't that their job? Isn't that Mike Tomlin's job? And I hear you on life after Tomlin or life in while you're swimming through the sea of sucks and it's scary. But I think for Steelers fans, where they are right now and continuing the same pattern of 10-7, 9-8, getting bounced in the same round of the playoffs, being the exact same team every year for the last decade, no matter what you do at the quarterback position or, in free agency at any other position, they get the exact same result. That maybe swimming through the sea of suck, or at least the sea of mystery, sounds more intriguing. It could be wrong, and they may regret that decision, but I don't blame Steelers fans for wanting something different.